Good evening, and welcome back to the weird and the wonderful with Strange Bones. That's me. And we're starting a new sort of uh, thing tonight. And the moment I began doing the necessary research in all of the different sort of things that I wanted to do for this particular hi there for this particular live. I quickly realized that it was going to be an interesting one, if for no other reason than, in fact, there's a huge amount of confusion in terms of. So I'm going to get things started for us, and then as I do that, I hope I will be able to explain the confusion, such as it was, um, in order to try at least to to understand what's going on. Much thanks for those kind likes. I do appreciate it. So, in the last set of discussions, such as they were, it was asked of me, um, you know, why don't I have a go at doing the next bit on the supernatural and paranormal, um, on curses? Are they real? Should we worry about such things and more? And I immediately ran into difficulties, simply because what is a curse anyway? I mean, if we don't know what we're talking about, how on earth are we going to be able to even discuss it? So we're going to have to do some small definitions, so to speak. But to start ourselves off, do remember we have a single rule on this particular live. You do not have to believe or disbelieve. Your opinions are welcome in every manner and form, of course. All we ask is please be rude. Do not be rude. Let me try and wake that up a bit. My brain's clearly dead. Don't be rude. If you're rude, we give you the boot. That's the rules. Okay. You don't have to agree with any of it. You don't have to disagree. You can believe differently. In fact, we encourage you as much as possible to give your opinions, comment much, um, like, share, subscribe, all the good things that keep the channel going. Give plenty gifts so we can power this up and all the rest of it. But curses. What are curses? Now, the first problem is the word itself. What are we even talking about? So we need to answer that. Now, growing up at least, and I'm sure many of you will agree with me, that if you swore, then your parents would say, hey, no cursing. But that's swearing, not cursing. Also, swearing, as we use it today, isn't what swearing used to be. These days, swearing is using foul language, whereas in the past, it was an oath, a promise. So clearly, we need to establish what we are actually talking about right from the beginning. So a curse is that kind of thing that is pronounced against you so that something negative will occur. Much thanks for the likes, much thanks for the likes. Welcome and welcome. So the idea is something that is quite literally the opposite of a blessing. A blessing would be where I say something to wish you good fortune, good life, health, whatever. A curse is the opposite of that. Okay, so establishing that as a curse, then we can assume that we need to talk about whether or not these things actually can exist. Well, here's the problem. The first answer I'm going to give you is that if you believe in blessings, you have to believe in curses, because the two sides seem to imply if one must exist, the other must exist. If you don't believe that a blessing can exist, then okay, then you don't have to believe a curse exists. Fair enough. However, now to give you a little bit of context here, I was raised Catholic. I was trained as a priest. Now, the reason I'm pointing that out is quite simple. At no point was I ever, in the formal training that I had, taught about curses or what to do about them. They were never spoken of, ever. Which is kind of strange, because if you go into the Bible, and from my studies, I've read varying other religions' holy books as well, they also do the same. They speak of both blessings and curses, which implies, therefore, that they are integral to most belief systems, which is fair enough. And we know in history, both blessings and curses were taken very seriously. But these days, it's kind of like the way sex is viewed. We all know it's important. We all know it's integral to living, but we don't go talking about it because that would be bad, which is kind of weird as well. And similarly, we don't talk about curses. Blessings are okay, but then again, those are the good things, and talking about good things usually is considered to be good. So why not? And I don't have an answer on that. It's a very strange thing. But now, what about curses? What are they? Should we be worried? In some of the research that I did, it was pointed out by a number of different Christian groups, and I'm speaking from the sort of area that I know more of than others. They will tell you no, they don't exist. Well, clearly they do. They're in Scripture, if you're religious. Furthermore, there is no comment back or forth or anything to tell you at all what to do about it, because further research brought up the point that you get different kinds of curses, and they can come from all sorts of sources, which makes it very, very complicated. And we have, at least in the history of humanity, several varieties of curses. Now, we know that, at least in the modern age, from terrible cartoon villains and more, you'll have people saying things like, curses, foiled again. What are they even talking about? That doesn't seem to be a thing. We've heard of, I'm sure, at least via movies and such, that you get curses on Egyptian tombs. You have the images of witches sticking pins in a doll. What are we really speaking of anyway? Now, in some of my research on it, I can tell you that back in the day, and I'm talking call it 1,000 years ago, records show that if you were to actually put a curse on someone, it was taken so seriously that you could be tried in court and even executed for doing that. So it was taken pretty serious as a hardcore thing. All right, if that's the case, then maybe we should kind of take it seriously. Now, according to one view, curses are basically a kind of prayer, just as the good kind of prayer is a way of communicating to a deity to get a hold of good things on yourself or on another. A curse is a negative version to bring bad things on someone or something. So, if that's essentially the view, it would stand to reason why curses are seen as so bad in at least Christianity and many of the modern religions. You shouldn't do it because asking God to go and kill someone is clearly not good. Fair enough. This seems fair enough. Certain religions have deities, however, that are not necessarily entirely good or entirely bad, and it might be considered reasonable that you ask for good things for those that you like and bad things for those that you don't. All right, fair enough. And there may be reasons in different ways for curses. So, for example, the one on the Egyptian tombs is if anyone breaks in and does bad things to what is here, then they bring upon themselves the curse in order to ward people away from disturbing the tomb. So we have that kind of curse. We also have versions where people get nasty and grab a doll and stick pins in it, dependent on the modus operandi, where it's a deliberate and aimed at a specific individual. So we get general curses, we get individual curses, but ultimately, you kind of get three categories of curse: protective, like on the tombs, fair enough; malicious, intended to harm; and one which perhaps is quite an important version: self curses. Well, what is they? All right, so self curses are the least complicated sort because really serious ones are rare, or ought to be perhaps, and they're always conditional. They are, in many ways, guarantees of good faith, and there are a great many versions in stories and history and so on and so forth of these. And the most famous one that we have, which is relevant to South Africa, is the curse of the Flying Dutchman. Now, the captain swore during a storm that he would get around the Cape of Good Hope, even if it took him until doomsday. However, unfortunately, the ship sank, and so by the captain's own curse, they couldn't stop trying until doomsday, and therefore the phantom ship of the Flying Dutchman to this day tries to sail around the Cape Horn. So there's a self curse for you. Many thanks for the likes there. That is very kind of you. So they say at least that ship, which is a ghost ship, is still saying because of a self curse. Similarly, at least in literature, in the Divine Comedy, written by Dante Alighieri in the Inferno. Dante worms his way into a damned soul's confidence by lying to him, and then saying that if he is lying, may I be sent to the bottom of the ice, which, in reference to, was the deepest pit of hell. Now, all right. The thing was then, he was lying, um, and he did it deliberately because he found himself thereafter at the bottommost, the ninth circle of hell. Now, that's a story, granted, but it shows the point, if you will. So there are small versions, if you will, of self curses, and we've all probably said them at some point as a child. Cross my heart and hope to die. Do you really? Well, that's a kind of curse, so to speak. We generally don't expect it to actually happen. But in the past, it was considered to be a very serious thing. And if somebody made an oath in that version and thereafter died, no blame would be put anywhere, simply because it was understood you asked for it. So, just punishment. These things were so serious in the past that they could even go up in court. And funnily enough, in court, we often still use that. You place your hand upon a holy book and swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God. It's a self-curse. And what might God do if you do not tell the truth is hold you divinely accountable. So it seems that curses remain in our culture, even if we don't particularly believe in them anymore. But are they real? And should we care? Well, if we believe in any religion, the answer is yes, you should. It matters. Because if you believe in God, any oath sworn before God goes both ways, whatever your deity might be. So perhaps we should take them seriously, and for that matter, perhaps we should actually think about what we're saying. Because in a great many ways, one of the problems we have in modern society is that we don't think terribly hard about what we are saying. And these days, I think that is one of the great failings of the modern world, is that we literally don't take our words seriously. And perhaps we should. Perhaps the very fact of our words matter. So, how else can we talk about it then? Well, I think in many ways that history tells us that over time, a lot of people do take them seriously. The story of Jan Ure's account of a 1930s trial held by the Gypsies, one of their number had a bag of coins stolen, and it was plain that no outsider could have done it. Therefore, a trial was held, and every person had to come up to the judge, who would recite a series of curses, beginning with, "If you know anything or have anything related to the gold pieces stolen from Carolina, and you do not inform this court, may you die in horrible agony. And the person must reply, Bater, which means, may it be so. And the curses grew more terrible and merciless until one after another, each person in the group was spoken to and properly interrogated via curse, so to speak, in order to ensure that honesty and a certain amount of terror was instilled in each person. And the implication was that while there was no evidence and no way of checking at this time, it did mean that if a particular person then suddenly dropped dead, then it would have been proof positive that they were guilty. Maybe. Sufficient fear, however, was apparently, in the story at least, not instilled, but shortly afterwards, a particular woman suddenly became very, very ill, and just before passing away, confessed to stealing the gold. So perhaps, at least according to the legends, the curses do work. Now, self-curses are unique in that they involve one individual and are thus voluntarily entered into by both curser and victim. And this is different from protective or malicious curses, which are the ones we are generally far more familiar with. Protectives are ones laid upon a person or object for their defense, and the protective object generally would have it written upon it. So it might be looked on as a sleeping curse. Now, what would a sleeping curse mean? It would mean the following. It would mean that the curse is set kind of like a trap, but only triggered if certain things happen. So as long as those things never happen, that curse will never fall on anyone. So they are not personally directed, but they are specifically directed. All right. They have something in common with charms and amulets in that regard. So they are supposed to make an evildoer's own evil rebound back on the evildoer, not really a protection per se, as a consequence curse, I would prefer. Now, of course, we all know the stories of what happened with the Egyptian tombs and so on and so forth. Now, the best known story of all, when the Earl of Carnarvon's exploration team opened the tomb of King Tutankhamun in 1922, they found a clay tablet which read, "Death shall come on swift rings to him that toucheth the tomb of the Pharaoh." Now, the tomb is not the entire pyramid, but the bit on the inside. So you're okay if you're walking past and touch the pyramid, but if you break into it and get into the tomb, then that would trigger said curse. Now, several of the explorers who opened the tomb did indeed pass away fairly young in the following years. And of course, as a result, these are attributed, at the very least, to the curse. They shouldn't have got involved. They shouldn't have gone in. And because the curse was not directed specifically at thieves, because I'm sure that a great many archaeologists would say, no, no, we're not thieves, we're trying to preserve. That's arguable too, I suppose. But it said if you went in, well, one explorer pointed out that there was no precedent for Egyptians couching the curse in such language, and that they didn't use clay tablets like that, which now they're nitpicking, and it was in there and people died. What's a coincidence? How many times must a thing happen before it's not a coincidence and a thing? I don't know. Whether or not there's so-called scientific fact, arguable. Many less notorious ancient tombs did have curses in them as well on other ways. There was one especially detailed one dating from around 350 BC that was made on the tomb of a king who had ruled the Middle Eastern province, where it literally read, I, Tabnith, priest of Ashtart, king of the Sidonians, son of Ishmunazar, priest of Ashtart, king of the Sidonians, lie in this coffin. My curse be with whatever man thou art that bringest forth this coffin. Do not open me nor disquiet me, for I have not indeed silver, I have not indeed gold, nor any jewels. Only I am lying in this coffin, and do not open me or disquiet me, for that thing that is an abomination to Ashtart. And if thou do at all open me, and at all disquiet me, mayest thou have no seed among the living under the sun, nor resting place among the shades. Which is pretty damn dire, let's face it. I mean, in terms of that's a pretty good one. Now, I don't know if they did open or move the coffin. If they did, I was not able to discover what happened as a result, but as curses go, it's a pretty good one. Now, tombs were not the only objects so protected. Books and written materials in general were considered to be very precious, expensive, time-consuming to make, easy to damage, and for thousands of years they and the libraries which contained them had protective curses laid on them. This was not done solely because of their expense, though that played a pretty big role. According to Mark Drogan in his book Anathema, every civilization created for itself a form of writing felt that the skill had originated as a direct gift from superhuman sources, and by writing things down, they were using divinely given instrument, and therefore they felt that any abuse of it in any way must have a great deal of response. Fair enough. No wonder, therefore, that 6,000 years ago the king of Nippur inscribed a curse on his library that was intended to deter anyone that might try to damage or destroy the building. And, of course, it invoked the gods of Bel and Shamash to tear out his foundation and exterminate his prosperity, which is pretty harsh. The Babylonian king of sorry, not of, man, that's the name. He was a Babylonian king. He died in 626 BC, and his one went even further, including to warn against theft and more. And the curses get pretty hardcore. Let's just say that. So, more detailed, more terrifying, more dire results, which by and large archaeologists seem to quite cheerfully not worry too much about. I'm sure that many modern librarians would enjoy the idea of putting that on people that don't look after their books. Now, Western Europeans only seem to have come into the whole idea of putting curses on libraries quite a bit later. But they did do it, even as Christianity spread, and names invoked for protecting objects became those of Christ and the saints. The instrument of curses changed somewhat, but by and large, your basic theme of damnation to hell and so on and so forth, and again the wiping out of the offender's line, absolutely. And during the Third Council of Constantinople in 680, it was decreed that anyone who lent, sold, or damaged any holy books would be excommunicated, which isn't just you're not allowed to be part of the church anymore. You need to understand in the historical context, it also meant you were going to hell, which is pretty harsh. Hey, Karina, welcome, welcome, welcome. Glad you can stop in for this. Lovely to see you. We're talking curses and what it might mean. So, even in the Christian church, quite a few things had curses inscribed within them. One 11th century lectionary made in the Abbey of St. Peter in Salzburg had a beautifully lettered curse on its last page. Whoever steals this, may he suffer violent bodily pains. But of course, curses are not only for religious materials, they could be put on all kinds of things, including legal documents. So, as we progress, and yes, guys, remember, like, share, subscribe, and all the rest of it. Send lots of hearts and prezzies so we can keep it all going. And much thanks to Karina for the kindnesses she has just bestowed upon the channel. Now, as we progress, legal materials, absolutely. They would have them too, that anybody that doesn't live up their side of the legal bargain would not only face legal ramifications, but possibly also curses, malediction, excommunication, and more. There was one charter that was drawn up by a certain Petrus Veremudi in the Middle Ages that went along the lines of, if any one of my lineage or anyone extraneous should violate this document, may curse and malediction and excommunication befall him, and may he be damned in hell like Judas who betrayed the Lord, and may he be accursed unto the 7th generation. That's a pretty harsh one. So, absolutely. And of course, one charm, which was for protection of cattle from thieves, termed up from the Anglo-Saxon, said that, if anyone do this deed, let it never avail him. May he wither entirely like wood withered by fire, be brittle as a thistle, and he who thinks to thieve these cattle or carry off these cows. Amen. Which again shows that it was indeed a kind of prayer, which is quite interesting. So your protective curses, now even to this day, people will carry what technically at least, though I dare say in individual religions they might argue back and forth, but which technically are amulets or charms. Um, Christians wear crosses. Why? Because it's essentially a charm, um, a blessing, but also a warning by and large that you have to do what is within the religion. Many religions do exactly that. We have all sorts of different amulets and charms, no matter what we call them, which by and large are protective in that regard. Um, Certainly, more obvious versions appear in things like the Witch's Almanac, which published a spell by Sybil Leek intended to ward off evil influences, which contains the line, "Let the evil return to whence it came," which is basically exactly that. If you bring evil against me, let it bounce off and go straight back to you. Um, in the modern age, Silver Ravenwolf, who's a fairly prolific writer within the modern Wiccan community, um, has an entire book dedicated to protective spells, old and new. And one of the newer ones is for protection for your car, um, which I suppose is understandable given the amount of money we put into such a thing. Though she 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 tends to be, shall we say, slightly more modernly PC, uh, deflecting negative energy um, without being overly specific as to where it goes or what will happen once it lands, so to speak, which is kind of the nice way of being cursing. Then, of course, you get your third category. Now, these are malicious curses. Now, look, a protective curse could be considered successful um, even if it was never activated. But malicious are very, very specific. Their only reason for existence is to harm somebody, usually a specific somebody, and are almost always a physical version. And of course, the most famous one is your voodoo doll type curse. Certainly not the only kind or the most important kind, but it's the one we know from movies. So, the dolls form a focus. Um, they come in a number of different shapes and sizes. I know that in my research, I discovered that quite a lot of the more European style witches prefer a jar over a poppet. The African traditions do like their poppets or dolls. Um, there are versions, even within India, of dolls and things being used. Um, going as far back uh, to the 4th century BC, there were Greek kolossoi, which were made of soft metal or wax. In Rome, there were versions found. Usually, what you did was identify the target with a name somewhere on the figure in some way, or a something of theirs, etc., and then do things to said puppet, which are supposed to then happen um, to the target. Now, most of the Greek versions were to incapacitate enemies, but sometimes they were meant to be fatal. It's impossible to know how many people could or did use the dolls, but certainly we know in 11th century England, a nun of all people very, very narrowly escaped a lynching as she had acquired the reputation for making figures. Ambrose Pare, a French doctor 5 centuries later, wrote that there were those who, having contrived the image and likeness of some absent party, pierce it with certain instruments, and a boast of afflicting, which, unlike any such illness as pleases them, would fall upon the target. During the Salem witch trials, Elizabeth Proctor was alleged to have been caught red-handed with such a poppet stuck full of needles, and was given in as evidence. But dolls are not the only devices. Bits of hair, nail parings, all kinds of things could be used. There was the case of a woman in England who attempted to demise the family of the Earl of Rutland by cursing and burying a handkerchief and a glove belonging to two family members. Antonia Fraser wrote that the coincidental sickenings and passing on of the children represented both her triumph and her downfall, because this caused the casters arrest. Now, another version that turned up in the research I did was ligature, which is the old and very traditional version, which turns up in many cultures all over the world, of tying knots. You tie a knot in a piece of string and it binds in some way. So there was a version where if you tie, you got a strip of cloth from a shirt that belonged to someone who's passed on, as good luck. But if you ever found yourself in trouble, you could tie 3 knots in it, which would render accusers unable to testify against you. So binding type things absolutely have been used over history. So bits of string and all. And for those of you who think, but surely that's only for these weird type cults and what have you, from the Middle East, there's a version that comes writing the victim's name in a clay bowl and then smashing it. In Psalm 129, it says, "Let the enemy be like grass on a roof, which withers before it can grow." That's a curse right there, written in scripture. So, yeah, there's quite a lot. The kolossoi were made from lead flattened, which were often used for just ordinary writing tablets, but then had the name and the curse put on it. Romans used curse tablets when they could. The Roman Bath Museum in Bath in England has quite a collection of them. The baths there were, as we know, also a temple of a particular goddess, and they were thrown into the water of the spring, these tablets. Some places tablets were buried. They were typically written on lead. Why? Probably because it was cheaper than a lot of things, but still important enough and soft and weak, which might transfer these qualities to the victim, perhaps. But of course, given that almost nobody back in the day could actually write, I mean, we know for a fact something which is recorded in the Bible that most people get wrong is when Jesus was found as a young kid reading the scripture in the temple. The main shock was not simply that he understood what was going on and could argue it, it was that he could damn well read it at all. Most people couldn't read, much less children. It's a reality, and it's a reality world over. Most people cannot write. So you had to go to someone who could write, who would have to be paid and paid to write them properly. Very often, these things were written backwards so that nobody but the gods could read it easily. So you had to fork out a fair bit of cash to get something like this done. Um, a typical curse might describe the crime committed, theft of a possession or a lover or some such pain, and then asks that the usual suffering would be inflicted upon the cause of the problem. And then sometimes the petitioner would even mention specific suspects if they didn't know, just to maybe bring out who did it. That should the one who has taken off such and such, as in fact was found on a Roman tablet, may he who carried off Vilbia from me become as liquid as water. May she who obscenely devoured her become dumb, whether it be Velvinia, Exuperius, Verianus, Severan, Augustalis, Comitanius, Germanilla, or Jovina. So they're sort of helping the gods along by saying it's one of these buggers, you know. Now, if it was directed at a named victim, and probably because rumors get around, it was considered well worth the investment for the victim then to come and get his own tablet done to ward it off and send it back, which of course you can imagine the scribes were the one that sort of dropped the wink because it meant that they would be paid to write more. Now, similar approaches to written curses uh, were used by the Vikings as well, who would use rune uh, writing on sticks of wood, bind runes and such, and then hide them somewhere in the intended victim's possessions or bury them nearby. And during the Middle Ages, this would be a common thing. Now, the writing of the name uh, was quite important, and in the 16th century, during the witch craze, um, it went so far as to point out that it would cause your name to be written in the devil's book. And accusers at Salem and other places always claimed that the supposed witch had tried to get her victim to write her name, which is usually about the only thing a person ever knew how to write, in a black book to seal a pact with the devil, basically voluntarily in a way, even if unknowingly. So written words were considered damning in a great many ways. But even spoken ones could be considered pretty bad. So these days, if I were to say to you, "Oh, go to hell," it probably wouldn't mean much. If I said that back in the day, it could lead me to being burnt at the stake as a witch. You just didn't do it. Now, this shows up in the famous witch trials in the 1500s and 1600s. Sarah Good, accused at Salem, had evidence against her the fact that she had muttered imprecations when people refused to give her food, and many domestic disasters were attributed to her mysterious mumblings, which could very well have just been a dotty old woman. Uh, The Salem judges, however, were less careful than their medieval forebears when it came to distinguishing between a solemnly meant curse and just common swearing. We know in the Canterbury Tales, Chaucer gives an example of this distinction where his friar tells the story of a wicked summoner who falls in with the devil while on his way to defraud an old woman. And they pass by a man who curses his oxen and wishes them with the devil. But the devil refuses them because the curse wasn't really meant. But later on, um, when the summoner arrives at the old woman's cottage and she wishes him with the devil drags the summoner away because the woman spoke in earnest. So who's to say? Now, of course, along with it, there are different views in different cultures as to what might actually result in you performing such a curse as well. So it might have cost, be warned. We do know, for example, the idea of to mean it in earnest comes up in Harry Potter, of all things. When Harry attempts to use a strong, unforgivable curse, he's told by Bellatrix Lestrange that it didn't work because you have to mean it, Potter. And that comes from historical point, right in that version. So written words, spoken words, dolls, bits of hair, strategic knots, all of them convenient, if not vital tools. But the most basic, of course, requires none of this. And this is the famous evil eye, which is said to be even more insidious because with the evil eye, it can be placed upon the victim with no one even being aware of it. A powerful emotion and a stare is quite sufficient and it can actually turn from just an emotion into a curse. So a sterile woman looking with too much envy upon a baby, a poor man who stares with too much envy or jealousy at the wealth of another, could accidentally cast the evil eye on a person, it seems. And of course, we know that one of the famous things that you can get if you go to Greece are those little blue and white beads that are meant to ward off the evil eye. So, a certain truth to that. And we find it, of course, in a lot of cultural things as well. If anyone demurs at another's praise, they may receive the comment, "Don't jinx it." Well, is it any different? So there is that. It seems, therefore, that curses are believed by a great number of religions, whether we even realize it or not, right to the modern age, and therefore perhaps, maybe, should be taken very seriously. But having said that, all right, fair enough. But where do these things come from and what are we even talking about? Um, do we have some proper examples of specific ones that may or may not be considerable? Well, yes, we do. We all know the ancient curses, Tutankhamun's tombs and the like, but what about the modern day? I give to you the Kennedy curse. The Kennedy curse is a series of deaths, accidents, assassinations, and other calamities involving members of the American Kennedy family. The alleged curse has primarily struck the descendants of the businessman Joseph P. Kennedy, but it has also affected family, friends, associates, and other relatives. Political assassinations, plane crashes, and such have been the most common manifestations. Following the Chappaquiddick incidents in 1969, Ted Kennedy is quoted as saying he questioned if some awful curse did not hang over the Kennedys. Now, skeptics obviously say it's not possible, and for a large extended family to experience similar events over several generations is not impossible. However, things that might have been the result of said curse. August 12, 1944, Joseph P. Kennedy Jr. died when the military aircraft he was piloting exploded over East Suffolk. September 9, 1944, William Cavendish, the Marquess of Hartington, a newlywed husband of Kathleen Kennedy, was fatally shot by a German sniper in Belgium. May 13, 1948, Kathleen Kennedy died of a plane crash in France. August 23, 1956, Arabella Kennedy died at birth. August 9, 1963, Patrick Bouvier Kennedy died at birth. November 22, 1963, U.S. President John F. Kennedy, assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald. June 5, 1968, U.S. Senator and Democratic presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy, shot by Sirhan Sirhan. January 23, 1974, Athalesia Ponsell Lindsay, who was dating Joseph P. Kennedy Jr. until his death, murdered. April 21st, 1984, David A. Kennedy, son of Robert F. Kennedy, died in Palm Beach. December 31, 1997, Michael Lemoyne Kennedy, son of Robert F. Kennedy, died in a skiing accident. July 16, 1999, John F. Kennedy Jr. died with his wife and sister in a plane crash. September 16, 2011, Cara Kennedy, daughter of Ted Kennedy, had a heart attack while exercising at a health club and passed on. May 16, 2012, Mary Richardson Kennedy, wife of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., died by self-infliction. August 1, 2019, Swaris Kennedy Hill, granddaughter of Robert F. Kennedy, died of a drug overdose. April 2nd, 2020, Maeve Kennedy McKean, granddaughter of Robert F. Kennedy, disappeared with her 8-year-old son Gideon, and later the next week they were recovered as having drowned. Those are just the deaths. The other incidents go over the same historical length, and yes, it is possible and arguable that all of these things must be unrelated, but that's a heck of a lot of bad to happen to one family. So, was it a big deal? Did it matter? And I suppose we have to ask, should we care? Well, let's go on and see something else then. The next interesting one is the Hope Diamond, a 45-carat gem, said to have been plucked, in fact, from the statue of a Hindu goddess, which seems to be the sort of thing you should not do, um, just in case you invoke the wrath of that which should not be invoked. We have this Hope diamond, which, as I understand it, is quite a valuable rock. Um, and basically, it says that anybody who touch it will come to grief because it was taken. French King Louis the XVI and Marie Antoinette both owned the diamond, and well, French Revolution, and we know what happened there. Washington Post owner Evelyn Walsh McLean lost her son to a car crash and her daughter to self-destruction. It now sits in the Smithsonian Museum, and some say that the curse ended when it was donated. Others say it's merely dormant, awaiting the next person to try to get it. But yes, you have that. Now, the next interesting one is one which is tied into a movie of all things. And this is a weird one because are stories just stories? Or should we be scared? Well, we have the poltergeist curse. What is the poltergeist curse? The poltergeist curse is this. The poltergeist curse is from the movie Poltergeist, um, which was said to be one of the most cursed productions in Hollywood. 4 cast members passed away under tragic circumstances after the trilogy was released. Heather O'Rourke, who played young Carol Ann, passed at 12 from an unknown illness. Dominique Dunn, another cast member, was in fact murdered by her boyfriend. And some people say that it started because the skeletons, and those of you who didn't know this, it's a creepy fact about the movies for you. It started because the skeletons that you see in the filming were real. Directors claimed it saved on budget, but many wonder if it invited something a lot darker. And besides those who passed on, there was a number of things that happened to varying people connected with the films that possibly are quite disturbing. There's even things you want to have some modern ones, one which is both ancient and modern. In 1991, the 5,300-year-old mummy was found, known as Otzi, the Iceman, scientific marvel, but maybe something dark. And why? At least 7 people connected to his study have passed on quite mysteriously and unexpectedly. The first was forensic pathologist Rainer Henn, who handled the body with his bare hands, car accident. Then the mountaineer Kurt Fritz, who led researchers to the site, avalanche, and several others with fatal heart attacks or accidents. Now, the death raised eyebrows. Was Otzi protecting himself? Or really is it just paranoia? But the body remains frozen in a museum, and I'm not sure how good an idea it might prove to be to go poking it. I leave it to you. But there is more. Of course there is more, and why not more? More is good, is it not? Cheers. Let us do more. And the more that we shall do is from the 1980s. What happened in the 1980s? Well, in the 1980s in England, house fires became linked to a strange coincidence: a painting of a crying boy. Firefighters reported that the artwork would always survive the flames, even though everything else burnt to ash. Painting was mass produced and found in homes across the UK. Many destroyed their copies out of fear. Some believed the boy in the painting represented a tragic spirit, and others thought it was cursed by design. Despite investigations, no one could explain the phenomena. Uh, was it a flame retarding varnish that protected it? But even today, collectors now wonder if it should be in their homes at all. But what can we say? There are a great many interesting stories about a great many interesting things. And in terms of answers, there isn't a great deal going on. Now, of course, we can go on with our various historical uh, curses, some of which are modern and some of which are not. Now, for those of you who are history buffs or possibly buffs of the military tactics and things, one of the greats was a warlord that controlled most of Asia during the 14th century. And this is the chappie known as Timur, or as he is often known, Tamerlane, a military tactician whose warfare took out some 17 million people. A celebrated patron, however, of architecture and the arts. So you can have multiple hobbies, it seems. And in 1941, Joseph Stalin sent a team of archaeologists to open his tomb in Samarkand in Uzbekistan, much to the alarm of local residents and Muslim clergy. Upon opening Timur's coffin, however, they discovered an inscription: "Whoever opens my tomb shall unleash an invader more terrible than I." Within a matter of hours, Adolf Hitler's troops invaded Russia, and an estimated 26 million people were taken out as a result. 1942, Stalin ordered Timur's remains to be reinterred back in Samarkand in accordance with proper Islamic tradition. Shortly thereafter, the German army surrendered at Stalingrad, ending the campaign against the Russians. Coincidence? Well, maybe, but maybe not. Who's to say? It's a difficult one. How coincidental is coincidence? And what about the curse of Tippecanoe? Now, did the Native American leader Tecumseh curse William Henry Harrison after Harrison's troops emerged victorious at the Battle of Tippecanoe? Some historians have noted that ever since Harrison became president in 1840, every president elected to office in 20-year intervals have passed on while serving as president. Harrison died of pneumonia after just 1 month in office. Lincoln, elected in 1860, was assassinated, as were James A. Garfield in 1880, William McKinley in 1900, both Warren G. Harding in 1920 and Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1940 died in office, while John F. Kennedy was assassinated. Ronald Reagan was the target of an assassination, but survived. And after that, it seemed the curse was lifted. Was the curse real? Well, let's talk about one which is really real, or at least really weird. Huge thanks to uh, Karina for her huge kindnesses. We have ice creams and hearts and roses and more. You're an absolute darling. Thank you so much. And for you, I give you the Billy Goat curse. In 1945, a man named Bill Billy Goat Cianis was kicked out of a Chicago Cubs game because he brought his pet goat with him. Outraged, Cianis reportedly cursed the club with the words, "The Cubs ain't gonna win no more." Sure enough, the Cubs lost the game and haven't won a World Series in more than a century, despite many attempts over the years to lift the curse, some of them involving goats. While most regard the curse as a silly superstition, many long-time fans take it very seriously. This April, police in Cook County found a decapitated goat tied to a tree near a golf course. Few days later, an unknown man delivered said head to Tom Ricketts, current owner of the Chicago Cubs. Uh, so it seems that whether or not these things are real, people take them pretty damn seriously. Is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. But it's pretty creepy. Now, what other strange and interesting ones can we talk about? Busby's Stoop. Hanging on a wall inside the Thirsk Museum in North Yorkshire is an old wooden chair. A chair with a very worrying history. The seat is known as Busby's Stoop, or Dead Man's Chair, a cursed chair, and anybody that sits in it, that's it. Now, in 1702, Thomas Busby was convicted of murder. According to one version of the story, he was arrested in a local pub while sitting in his favorite chair, and he then cursed the chair on which he was sitting as he was led away. Over the years, the old chair became associated with untimely passing on. Several Canadian airmen during World War II sat in it and then passed on not long after in bombing raids. Hardly proof it was war. But in the 1970s, some fatal car crashes and other tragic deaths were also linked to the chair, and at this point, the landlord of the pub gave it to a museum. It stayed in the corner of the museum for quite a while until a couple of people, probably on a dare, tried to sit in it, and subsequently, indeed, they too. Whereupon the museum basically hung it up, high up the wall, so you can look, but you can't touch. Is it cursed? Maybe. What about the gold of Tolosa? Most famous cursed objects in history came from the city of Tolosa, as the Romans called it, which today we call Toulouse in France. 2,000 years ago was home to the Volcae, a Gallic group. Now, when the Gauls of Tolosa returned home from fighting and plundering in the eastern Mediterranean, they found the Romans waiting for them and eyeing up the masses of gold they had come back with. The booty was said to be cursed, and the Romans who seized the gold were never seen nor heard from again. Apparently, the treasure is still out there somewhere, many claiming it lies in the bottom of a lake in the south of France. But, well, maybe it shouldn't be found. It seems that anyone that had anything to do with simply. Then we have the chained oak. What is the chained oak, I hear you cry? Well, the chained oak is entirely this. Um, According to the story, on one dark autumn night in the 19th century, the Earl of Shrewsbury was in his horse-drawn coach, meandering along a bumpy old forest road towards his ancestral seat at Alton Towers in Staffordshire. The coach happened upon an elderly woman standing in the middle of the road, and the lady begged for some money from the Earl, but he turned on her savagely, refusing to give her anything and demanding she get out the way. The woman then placed a curse upon the Earl and his family, telling him that every branch that fell from the estate's famous old oak tree would cause a member of his family to pass on. The curse struck just hours later when one of the Earl's family inexplicably died after a storm that night had hit the oak tree and severed a branch. This was enough to convince the noble, and he ordered his servants to chain up the branches so that none might fall. And to this day, the venerable old tree retains its old rusty chains. Maybe if somebody cut it down, his entire family would go poof. I don't know. What about the curse of Carlisle? In the middle of the underpass in the city of Carlisle is a 14-ton granite boulder. This is known as the Cursing Stone, and it was installed for the Millennium celebrations in 2001. Hundreds of words are inscribed on the stone, part of a 1,069-word curse issued by the Archbishop Dunbar of Glasgow in 1525 to deter reivers who pillaged the border areas of England and Scotland. Floods, foot and mouth disease, and a large fire in the city, and a terrible run of form for the local football team have all been attributed to said stone. And people have said that it's a stone that should be moved, removed, and not allowed. Opponents wanted it taken away, but a local white witch stated that removing the stone would only acknowledge the curse and therefore make it stronger. So now they've got a problem. They're damned if they do, and they're damned if they don't. What do they do? Any comments? Tell me what you think. Give a comment thereon. And of course, like, share, subscribe, and do all the good things that make this channel possible. I see we have a number of people that come quite a lot, and I've seen some of you before. But alas and alack, it is only one or two that ever gives a like. The curse of the Braganzas. The royal house of Braganza ruled Portugal and its empires overseas from 1640 to 1910, which is a heck of a long time if you think about it. The family curse is probably one of the most famous in European history and is mentioned in several historical records. According to the history of the curse, it began in the time of King John IV of Portugal, who reigned from 1640 to 1656. He is said to have assaulted a Franciscan monk who approached him begging for money. The young king kicked the old fellow and told him to be on his way. Now, the furious friar then placed a curse on the king, telling him that every firstborn male of his royal line would die before being crowned. The curse, in fact, did play out, and all firstborn males of the Braganzas, aside from 3, did not live long enough to sit on the throne. So there you go. Don't mess with holy men, it seems. And of course, it seems that Christians can and did uh, curse. So maybe they should be careful. But let us proceed, because there are more. We need to talk at some stage about objects that are cursed. Um, and one of the most interesting, which I particularly do find quite chilling, is the famous Dybbuk box. Now, the story of the Dybbuk box began in 2001 after an antiques dealer purchased an old wine cabinet in an estate sale. Now, this is one we will go into in much more detail because it's just so damned cool. But essentially, what it was, uh, the wine cabinet was not only a wine cabinet, but a container of a Jewish spirit known as a dybbuk. And essentially, um, it got so famous for the terrible things that it caused that it even featured on some of the modern ghost story thingies. Um, and they say even the rapper Post Malone was cursed by the same box uh, just by coming into contact with it. So we will have to look in that one in detail. We also have the Tallman bunk beds, which is another one I would like to know a little more about, where Debbie and Alan Tallman in 1987 purchased bunk beds at a second-hand store for their two children. But with it, it seemed that they got more than they bargained for, as the children started speaking of an old woman with black hair wandering around their room. Um, Alan confronted the entity and it began to stalk him. So, something else that needs considering in that regard. We also have other famous ones like James Dean's famous Porsche 550 Spider, which we will absolutely go further into in future lives simply because, come on, anything that good? There's some quite creepy stories of severed hands and more that are quite bizarre. But nevertheless, I think that we have achieved a good start on what kind of things are out there that might actually be a lot more worrying than you ever realized. It seems that curses are indeed real. We find them in a number of religious books, which says that they're very much some kind of a thing in more than one religion. They are found in many places around the world, and it seems that it is only in the very modern age that people either don't talk of them or refuse in some manner or form to refer or speak to them. Perhaps that's quite important. I do know for a fact that in South Africa there's absolutely a strong belief in such things, and you really do have to be careful not to do a formal curse of any kind, as it can result in quite a lot of um, things, if you will. And as we have to say, and as my research has turned up, a curse is the opposite of a blessing. you can't believe in one without believing in the others. And it seems that it has a great deal to do with intent. You've got to mean it. But if you really do, terrible things can follow. And as I have mentioned, it also has a price. And in that regard, maybe you do have to think carefully in that regard. Now, to those who say that if you are a truly good person and you fulfill all the requirements of being true to your deity, then no curse can harm you. But then the problem with that, I suppose, I have to ask, how much faith is enough faith? It's kind of hard to establish something like that or be sure in any manner or form. So that certainly makes it difficult. I've noted a number of different religions come up with different answers, but again, I point out that I find it worrying in a way how little is told. It's almost, yo, welcome, welcome. Good to see you, my friend. Um, I find it difficult to reconcile, if you will, the belief in it and the not talking about it. The closest in the modern age that anybody says much is in karma, where they say that what good you do comes back, and equally what bad you do comes back, which implies then that certainly what goes around comes around. But do the curses work? And if so, how important is it in that regard? There's just so many questions. One person who says that they feel that there must be some kind on them. Nothing has ever come easy for me, they say. I have a multitude of health problems. Life has always been about financial struggles. Never done anything much, and never even managing to get very many friends ever. Just turned 60 and have been on disability for 3 years. During the pandemic, we could no longer manage and couldn't even get out of our 900 square foot apartment. We had moved to a state to be near my husband's family, and the son that was raised by his mother from age 12. That same son didn't want a relationship with his father and left us without any family or friends in the area. This meant that we were stuck without anybody or anything, even though they were very rich, well off, and able to sort out. They basically left the family bereft. And as a result, things just got worse and worse. And eventually, they got to a point that they say that now we are in a retirement home and can't afford. And it seems that this must have been a curse. I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. I don't have proof, I suppose. Any comments? Any thoughts? Do you think curses are real? Should we do more upon this and talk about specific individual ones? Um, about ancient or modern? What are your thinkings here on? And should we be worried? And what is, if anything, the correct way to defend yourself or protect yourself um, from such terrifying things? I certainly don't have answers yet, but we will keep going through. It seems, however, that curses can absolutely be broken. And we've seen in just the bit we've touched on today, there were a couple that absolutely were broken, um, including the Kennedy curse and including the curse of Tippecanoe. So perhaps we also know that basically it is a form of prayer, and it may come from man, it may come from God. Um, we know that Proverbs 26:2 says that curses don't work. But that's from a version of a translation um, of a translation of a translation. And the original, I hate to say it, it doesn't quite say it like that at all. Um, it more implies that it's not that it doesn't work, but that God will protect you, which is not the same thing. The Hebrew is a little difficult. Numbers 23:8 says, how can I curse those whom God has not cursed? And how can I denounce those whom the Lord has not denounced? Which kind of implies that God can curse. And we see in Proverbs 3:33, the Lord's curse is on the house of the wicked, but he blesses the dwelling of the righteous. So it seems that yes, we have to believe in such things. And we can go on. Deuteronomy 11:26, behold, I set before you today a blessing and a curse. And if you obey the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you this day, and the curse, if you do not obey the commandments but turn aside. So it certainly implies that's a bad thing. And for those who say, but now we have the New Testament, John 1:12, yet to all who receive him and those believe in his name, he gave the right to become children. That's a blessing. So if you get blessings, you get curses. Don't know. Maybe, and then again, maybe not. So there are things to consider. Issues, I go as far as to say, points that need consideration. And yeah, we are going to have a go at this, to see what we can in fact encounter as we learn more and discover what possible things are out there. There is still a number of other specific ones to talk about, some of which come from religion. We know there are curses in Hinduism because Shva cursed Brahma. There are curses in the Bible. Uh, there are curses like the one of the Knights Templar. There are the Mal de Ojo of Mexico, which is basically the same as the Greek evil eye. There are curses from Santeria, the curse of La Llorona, which we encountered when we were looking at ghosts. So there's a whole ton. There are ones which I'm sure that you all know. 7 years bad luck if you break a mirror. Why? There are the curses that Dido put along on Troy, or Dido, depend how you pronounce. I don't know. It was thousands of years ago. So we know that those all went along. We know that even Jesus gave what is essentially a conditional curse, where certain places were admonished for lack of faith and decried that they would suffer mightily on the day of judgment, and that these 3 cities would not ascend heaven but fall into the depths of hell, which is pretty harsh. So yeah, there's a lot. How much need we worry about? I suppose that's a questionable thing. Maybe we have to worry a lot, and maybe we don't. But we shall see about that at a later stage. For now, we shall put the curses aside and go to the sweet blessing of bed. And I shall bid you good night. Sleep sweet, sleep deep, but remember, sleep with one eye open, because you never know. Keep that holy object near at hand, just in case, because it's possible that those things that go bump in the night might very well go bump for you.